I don't care about your title really. If you're a leader, it doesn't mean we know what your intent is or what we could actually relate to, according to your interest or passion. And I think that's what I love, sharing expertise and experiences. And that's what makes people grow and develop a multicultural mindset.
Welcome back to the Badass Leaders Podcast. Today's guest is a true global force in conscious leadership. Sophie Badré is the founder of Peaceful Leadership, a coaching and consulting practice empowering leaders to navigate complexity with clarity, cultural alignment, and confidence. With over 25 years of experience across 70 countries in every continent, yes, including Antarctica, Sophie brings rare, deeply human insights to what it means to lead in today's world. Her work with organizations like L'Oreal, the UN, INSEAD, and Cartier blends strategic thinking with emotional intelligence, helping leaders reconnect to their authentic selves and create meaningful, sustainable impact. Okay, if you're new to the podcast, welcome to our community. I am thrilled that you've taken time out of your day to learn and grow with us. So before you forget, take a moment to click that subscribe button to ensure you stay connected with the Badass Leaders community. So join me, Angela Gill Nelms, on today's episode of the Badass Leaders Podcast, where I'm joined each week by industry experts for intimate and eye-opening discussions about the challenges and joys facing the leaders of today. Subscribe, sit back, and get ready to scale your company, grow your brand, and unlock your full badass potential. So why don't we welcome you to the show, welcome you officially to the Badass Leaders Podcast. And as I normally like to do is say, hey, why don't you introduce yourself and tell the listeners why you're with us today?
Hi, Angela, and thank you so much for hosting me. I was born in Versailles, France, and I have dual citizenship, French and Canadian, actually. And I can effortless operate in any culture in the world. And I'm a multicultural leadership coach, and I encourage leaders to actually explore a world of responsibility, challenging assumptions, and cultivating a curious mindset and becoming powerful communicators.
Love it. Love it. Why don't we, I love first off, and I will say this isn't a question we sent you ahead of time, but it should be easy enough. I like for the listeners to get to know everyone as humans. So can you tell us a little bit about maybe growing up, your family situation, or what really, and then what really inspired you to get into the peaceful leadership that we're going to dig into today?
Sure. So I was raised in a three-generation family of pilots. So that's actually totally influenced my life since an early age. I traveled everywhere in the world, and I've worked for global companies throughout my whole career. And I was born in Versailles, France. My mom is from the south of France. I have two amazing artistic daughters, and I was raised near the forest and near the castle and very close to Paris. And I basically worked in multicultural environments through my entire life. And whether in Paris, New York, Miami, Montreal, Tokyo, Singapore, Abu Dhabi, and I traveled the world in very non-traditional ways, bringing a very nuanced understanding of cultural dynamics to my work, but also to my life. I always work with people speaking English with an accent from somewhere, which made everybody different. And I've always been taught to go to different people and people who do not like you, do not look like you, and so that we can cultivate multicultural mindsets and differences and embrace them. And so I basically, my leitmotiv world is adaptability. I navigate transitions smoothly, and that is what I help people to do now, also navigate their own transitions smoothly, embracing complexity and ambiguity. And actually, work with so many different people from different cultures and mindsets, and I had bosses from India, the US, Canada, France, Bulgaria, and others. And so I kind of adapted to any situation in any parts of the world. And I actually, a funny fact, discovered my own culture when I moved to New York working for French companies, which was also interesting.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait to hear. So first off, though, I want to know what airport in the world is your favorite, and what airport in the world is perhaps one you don't really love to travel through?
I love Mumbai airport. It's so chaotic,
Ah.
but I really enjoy the diversity, the welcoming, the warmth, and I just love the smell and everything. Every time I step there, it's like, oh my God, I'm in India, and I just love it.
Okay, and what airport are you kind of like, yeah, not necessarily my favorite?
You mean Parisian airports? Another
I
kind
love
of
it.
chaos.
I love it. I love it. You know, back when not traveling like you, but back when I worked at Medtronic and I traveled the one year I had, I think 110 or 112 Delta flights. And I used to tell people, okay, in the US and in some parts of Europe, these are my favorite airports. And this airport, seriously, like the airport that I can think of is in, I think, Springfield, Missouri, where they open security right before your flight, and your only option to eat is the subway right there. And I'm kind of like, yeah, this is not my idea of fun. But okay, let's dig in. I want to start a little bit more as well about learning about you. I know that you have been to every continent, including Antarctica. So before we dive deep, what would you say? And I know you've done leadership on most of these continents as well. What would you say a surprising lesson you've picked up somewhere totally unexpected?
So there were actually many, many different lessons from different countries and different unexpected contexts, I would say. One of them was in Nicaragua when I was distributing school supplies to South American kids and Central American kids. And I was very amazed by how the schools were managed by the directors of the school. That's not the one I want to talk about, but it's just like an example of how you can actually develop your leadership skills in totally unexpected environments. There was another one in Australia where this leader had to announce very unexpected and tough topics. And I was very surprised by his leadership style and asked him, how come you so like quiet and you seem very relaxed after announcing what you announced? And he said, I've been doing meditation for the past 40 years at 4 o'clock in the morning every day. And actually,
Wow.
the experience I wanted to share was something that really struck me. It was in Versailles, where I was actually born. It was in the Grand Royal Stables of the Palace of Versailles, where in a very unique setting, where all the, they have this National Equestrian Academy of horses. And I was the guinea pig of an experience of leadership with horses. And actually, I was in the middle of the stable, and the psychologists and the expert said, the horse is going to tell you all about you and your leadership style. And I love horses, but I'm scared of them. And I was in the middle of the stable, and he said, you cannot touch the animal, and just by the sound of your voice, the horse has to follow you. And then we'll analyze the situation.
Ooh.
And I was like inside, oh my God, like sweating and shaking. And so
I'm
I,
thinking right now, like I'm picturing myself as you're mentioning this, and I'm picturing myself in the situation and being like, one, paranoid. I immediately, when you start talking about this, got a paranoia. Like, what if the horse doesn't follow me? Does that
exactly.
say that
So
I'm
they,
no longer a badass leader?
exactly. So they send actually signals without filters, and that's how they use them. And I thought maybe they were raised in a certain way so that they would act, like in a circus. Absolutely not. So they said you cannot attach them, touch them, nothing, just the sound of your voice, the tone of your voice. And I was like, how am I going to do this? So I started talking to this horse that was obviously like twice my size at least. And finally, he started to move around and follow me, and I didn't dare talking too loud, and my voice is low. And so I don't have like a very impactful voice. And finally, he turned around with me and turned, and it worked. But these minutes sounded like ages. And finally, and everybody's looking at you, obviously, but you forget about time, you forget about people, and you forget about who's around, you forget about your surroundings. And finally, they stopped me after very long minutes and they said, they debriefed and said, this is how you act if you come into like a new setting. People, you start looking at people, you don't really talk much, and then all of a sudden you target somebody, and then people come to you and they respect you and they trust you right away. And I was like, oh my God, I was scared to death. And maybe you saw it, and I was like shaking. And the guy said, absolutely not. We didn't see anything. You hide it very well. And I was like, really? Like, so this is a perception. Like I didn't have that perception, and it was totally unexpected. And then they had other people try the experience. And even if you were like a horse expert, it didn't necessarily work the same way. And then I asked, did you have bad experiences with leaders who came to that experience as well? And he said, actually, we brought into the stable a CEO, and everybody was scared of him, but he didn't know that the team was thinking this of him. And he stepped in the middle, and then the horse was so scared, the horse jumped over the fence and left. And I was like, is that a true story? And they said, yes. Then
Wow.
there was no filter. So the animal doesn't lie. And so it was like a very unusual, unexpected experience, but it really marked the territory of like, where can I go to and what's possible, and the perception and interpretation of your own feelings and thoughts of how you feel versus what people think of you.
This is so amazing. Okay, so for listeners, anyone in the US that wants to do this experiment with your team and invite me, I want to come because I want to. And I really am thinking about it and thinking what an amazing opportunity to also learn more about the gifts that you have so you can amplify those, gain more. Also, I love that she said that she couldn't tell that you were nervous because I see this in people a lot. They think that everything that's going up on their head
Mhm.
is visible to the world, and often people are not that focused on, every single shake we do with our hands. And then I think the other thing is also observing, okay, what did not resonate well and what can I learn from that?
Exactly. So what I could learn definitely is be more gentle with myself, for sure.
Yes.
We always set high expectations about what should be, and we have a vision of what could be better or what we should improve. But in fact, what you feel is not necessarily what people see. And so it's like be humble, be gentle, and you're enough, I would say, like somebody else said.
Yes, 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 you are enough. We don't give ourselves enough grace oftentimes. And I like the idea of talking to ourselves the way we would talk to a dear friend. And
Mhm.
when we think about that for a dear friend, we give them so much grace. And then we're so hard on ourselves. So I absolutely love this. Okay, let's talk about peaceful leadership because that's an area right now that you're an expert in and very passionate about. And it's really what inspired you to be a guest on this podcast. When you and I met that day and you started telling me about it, I thought, okay, so many different individuals in the world, especially women, need to hear your story. So, what inspired the birth of peaceful leadership? And kind of, was there a defining moment when you realized this work really needed a new kind of leadership or the world needed a new kind of leadership?
I think like it was not born yesterday. I'm finally connecting the dots after like half a century, I would say, deciding that at this point of my life, I choose peace above anything else. I think Meryl Streep said that once, and I think it resonates well. And I also was invited at a conference in Bahrain recently to talk to women at a women's conference about leadership, and peaceful leadership came from peaceful coexistence that they created in Bahrain, which I thought was very intriguing and interesting. And I thought that resonates really well. I think the world.
Now, where is behind in the world
Yeah.
for listeners like myself who are horrible with geography? Can you kind of level set us at what area of the world you're in for this?
So Bahrain is between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. If
Okay,
that, if
amazing.
it, so it's a little island, and you go from one place to another through bridges, and it's an island. It's very small in the Middle East, and it's actually a very beautiful country in the middle of the Middle East.
So you were asked to come and speak or attend and be at this women's leadership
Mhm.
conference
Yes.
in at the small island in the Middle East. Okay.
Yeah, and actually they, I got inspired by their peaceful coexistence creation, and it says actually they affirmed absolute freedom of conscience in Article 22 of their constitution. And I was like, wow, east and west towards human coexistence. And it really, and also the location geographically, it's really Bahrain is between east and west. And I thought, and they do so many things for women. I was very inspired. And I don't think you need to be authoritative to actually lead. And you can do so many things much better, smoother, not because we're women and we can definitely be badass leaders, being not using force, but using kindness and listening skills and being conscious of what is.
Absolutely. And I think that to me, that's what defines what a badass leader is, an individual, because it's someone who goes in and they're participating in a journey with those people, not being forceful and driving towards this, but participating. Okay. So you define peaceful leadership as daring to care,
Mhm.
creating sustainable impact, and leading with responsibility and wisdom. So, in a world driven by urgency and ego, how does one begin to embody this kind of leadership?
So there's a French philosopher, who is called Jean-Paul Sartre. You might have heard of him. He said, "Man is condemned to be free because once he's thrown into the world, he's responsible for everything he does." So according to him, according to this author, human beings are fundamentally free and have the power to determine their own existence. And I love that philosophy because it's the freedom of both. Blessing and a curse, as it gives individuals the power to create their own lives and shape their own destinies, but also impose a tremendous burden of responsibility. And for me, it's like being responsible and care to dare, yes, because you have to be responsible for your acts and non-acts, actually. And I just want to bring more humanity to leadership and put human beings at the center of leadership and
So,
not.
how do you embody this now, like in the world today? Because the world today is, I would venture to say, maybe even especially in the US, the challenge with ego and making decisions based off of ego is pretty prominent. So, how do you, in today's world, how do you manifest this?
I'm just hoping to increase by peaceful leadership, increase leaders' consciousness about responsibility, and so that they become aware of their impact and the benefits of peaceful leadership as a whole. And a world of urgency, yes, but it's more understanding the consequences of making fast decisions. And speed can be a competitive advantage, but it could also be something that's not necessarily thought through. And so if we become or you become responsible and aware of your actions, you don't need to necessarily be speedy about responses, but you need to be conscious about what's key. What's key, meaning what are your priorities? It's not about rushing or acting recklessly. It's about recognizing when actually a quick action is needed or not. And it's a balance between, I would say, speed and deliberation with yourself and with a team. Like, do you need to do speedy things? But sometimes for market reactions, you have to, but sometimes it's better to like let go and also learn to let go and what needs to be kept and what needs to be let go. And of course, you have to also understand what crisis management means. And if you have a plan set in place for that, or it's the decision-making process that what's important, but you don't have to do it like in a speedy way. And ego, it's a big question, right? It's like, I think it's like taking the risk to be responsible, but what does ego mean? It doesn't mean you have to ignore it. You have to embrace it, know it's there. But that's the issue most of the time. Like if you're an egocentric person, do you know that you're an egocentric person? And do you realize the impact of being an egocentric person? Um, it's more like, like the ability to trust and inspire others and adapt, that would work and encourage leaders to lead with inspiration, not authority.
So early on, when you were just talking about this, you mentioned the benefits of leading in the peaceful
Mhm.
process, like you're talking about. Can you list for the listeners? Because some listeners might say, you know what, I don't have time to slow down. I don't have time for a peaceful, I just have to get shit done. So can you can you say that? I was trying to think of a different way to say it, but come on. So can you share kind of bring them in and say what's in it for them? So what are some of the benefits that you've seen from this?
Listening, 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 and empowering others, clarify your leadership intent. You don't have to like, when you say you have to get things done or shit done, you don't necessarily have to actually have a big ego to do this. You have to actually use others or like the skills of others to get things done properly. And yes, you don't have time, but you have time to pause and think. That's, I mean, right now, like good leadership would be pausing to adapt and be agile and think about what's good or what's key and what's needed. And if you rush into things, sometimes you get things done, but not to the benefit of your team.
So what have you seen going back to the benefit piece and trying to for the listeners to hear what's in it for them? What have you seen? Can you think of an example where you've worked with someone and you've helped them navigate towards this peaceful leadership approach and they've been able to see a return on investment just even with that mindset shift?
Yes, it was actually in Canada, and there was a big leadership issue of management issue as well. And actually, the leader decided to sit with the salespersons and understand what their daily life was, and sit next to them to understand the customer service process and how, like, put themselves to their level and level of understanding, clarify what needed to be clarified, and actually just calling them by their names and understanding who was doing what and what they could bring to the picture and motivate them did a huge difference and changed. It took a little while, of course, because you don't change a mindset by clicking your fingers, but just by becoming aware, the leader realized the team issues closely because he went to the market directly, went to them directly.
Okay, so I have two things that I'm thinking right now. One is you've said that leadership is art, and I
Mhm.
love, and I'm thinking as you're talking, I'm thinking even just the art of being able to navigate through that situation that you were just mentioning. But can you walk us through what, when you say you see leadership as art, what does that mean to you?
So, what does it mean to be an artist, right? When you
Hmm.
create, are you authentic to yourself? Do you want to deliver a specific message? What do you need to clarify? What do you believe to be true? And how do you embrace it? How do you navigate actually complexities or people's feedback? And actually, I was in a museum in Singapore and I thought it was very interesting. They had labels that you could put under a piece of art to give your own title. So it's a question of interpretation. What do you see there? What do you understand there? Or what if you would give a title, what would it be? So for me, like leadership is an art, so the same kind of thing. Like how do you want to be perceived? But how do people perceive you? But then you have to be ready to receive their feedback and understand what they think of the situation or of the way you lead, or so it's both ways. It's not like very hierarchical.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I like just really when to go back to what you said in the very beginning about leadership as art is that, well, if you're an artist, you should
Hmm.
be authentic to yourself
Hmm.
and also think about the audience that you're creating this art for and where's the best collaboration where you can be authentic. And it also speaks because I can imagine if I were a painter and someone walked up to my painting and they got me and they saw me, how empowering that would be. I
Hmm.
think the same thing in leadership, both also when you're growing leaders on your team, teaching them those skills to be able to capture those things and I also think it's part of expressing really what you're trying to convey in a clear and concise way so
Yes,
that those around you can absorb it.
absolutely. And it's not being afraid of showing what you want to show. What do you want to communicate? Clarify it, and then be happy to discuss it.
Yes, yes, love it. Okay, so I know that peaceful in your model and in your coaching, peaceful is actually an acronym for something, right? So can you walk us through this acronym? And also, listeners, so that you know why, while she's doing this, we will include links to her website and to additional areas so that you can find out more about this process. But can you walk us through the acronym peaceful?
Sure. So PEACEFUL, peaceful. So P for me is purpose, peaceful, passion. The E is empowerment, eclectic, empathy. The A is adaptability, agility, accountability. The C would be for clarity, communication, and care. The E is excellence, ethics, extraordinary. The F would be fulfilled, facetia, fairness. U would be unique, unparalleled, unbiased. And L would be liability, leadership, legacy.
Oh, okay. I want to talk about legacy. Why don't we jump to legacy? Because I'm
Hmm.
a big believer in part of my life quote is, you were only born once, only given one opportunity to do these things and to build a legacy. So you should make it count. And so tell me what legacy means for you, first off. And then
Hmm.
I want to learn what you think leaders should strive towards in building their legacy.
Okay. I actually wanted to share an example of because I love arts and I love music as well. And I don't know if you know the conductor, Daniel Barenboim. He,
No.
he's a very famous conductor, and he was born in Argentina, but I saw him in Berlin, and he's teaching master classes about how to become a good conductor. And he has a huge legacy because he transformed the world of music. It's not, and he was asking questions to this future conductor, and he said, "What is it you can actually bring to these musicians who know their music well? They don't need you for, to play the music, but what is it you can add to actually make a difference and be a powerful conductor? So put your emotions in it." And he said, "It's like transformative. Music should be transformative, and you should add something so significant so that they really need you as a conductor." And I thought, for him, he's now worldly famous and recognized, and people are want to still talk about him, obviously, and his way of leading, because it's not only being a musician, not only being a good leader, but also leading with empathy and like all your senses, like your eyes, your ears, your like you smell and you sweat and everything. And so I think it was a very good example of how to actually build legacy through the arts, but also any leader can think about what is it that they're going to leave in the future and how they inspired others.
I like to think about have you ever read the book, The Butterfly Effect?
No.
But it talks about just that the science, that the feeling of like when the butterfly wings flutter, how far it can be felt into the world. And I think it also is similar to like the ripple effect, right? And every time, I mean, I think I want leaders to think about not just their legacy is not the immediate thing that they're working on. It's all the individuals that they've had an impact on who are then having an impact on other individuals who are then having, that is a legacy that you carry on for generations past, that date on our tombstone that says we're no longer on earth. The
Yeah.
legacy is there's this is I think it's in a rap song. So Katie, our producer, maybe you could put the link in the show notes, but it's something like what is it? You're not dead when you die. You're dead when people stop mentioning your name. The last
Mhm.
time people mention your name. And so I'll have to find that song. It's a rap song. But anyway, so we will put a link to it in the show notes. You guys can listen to it and think about it. But whenever I hear that, I think exactly that. It's not that I necessarily want them to say, and yada, 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 but whoever we've positively impacted, for them to still be able to positively impact is amazing.
And
Okay.
remember, we gave
Yes.
an award to one of the INSEAD professors where I was working, and he said it was a legacy award, and he said, "I'm not dead yet."
Yes, that's true, right? Okay, well, we should award, and I love that too, right? Because oftentimes there are so many examples of people who actually don't get recognized for the amazing things that they did while they were on this planet. And I find that incredibly sad. I think we as leaders should also show that we're recognizing other amazing people while they're here as they can experience the gratitude and the gratefulness and that just warm feeling now while they're still on the planet.
And actually, there was a movie, I forgot the name of it, but it's so famous, I forgot. Like this young gentleman was gonna die, and he asked his girlfriend, "Please tell me now what you're gonna tell me or what you're gonna say at the funeral, because I won't be there to hear it." And so she like prepared an amazing, beautiful text, and he was there because obviously he was not gonna be there at that time. So it's the same. What would
Yeah,
you say
yes.
if I passed,
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. Okay, why don't we talk about conscious leadership and self-awareness? Okay, and I know you love a quote by Eckhart Tolle that awareness is the greatest agent for change. So let's dive into there. How does awareness transform a good leader into a badass leader?
So if you become conscious, obviously, you become responsible of your choices. And if you become conscious and aware, it's the only way to transform because you don't know what you don't know. So what do you want to know that you don't know? And actually, there was a great book by an INSEAD professor who's now an MIT professor and who wrote this book, Ask. And instead of like answer the questions, it's like ask the right questions. And I thought being aware is asking yourself the right questions and constantly being mindful of what is or what should be, and remember the key elements and concentrating on what you can control.
I think the last part is really important, right? Concentrating on what you can control. Sometimes when I find people who struggle in leadership and maybe they go back to that part about being a forceful leader or something like that, I think I see those tendencies in people who are fearful of the things they can't control. Therefore,
Mhm.
they try and control everything. But if you identify, my perspective is if a badass leader identifies, okay, this is what I can control, this is what's within my locus of control, and this is not. So I'm either going to collaborate with someone who can control this area, or I'm going to take a step back and focus on what I can control. And Lee, I try and teach that to people that I mentor as well, is that when we spend time stressing and anxiety and all of this about all these things that we absolutely cannot control,
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
often don't have the energy to focus on the things that we really can control. And
Mhm.
that's where the magic is. Like where you can only build a legacy on things that you can have an impact on, that you can somehow control. And by control, it also means control the way you handle yourself in the moment. That I think is a big piece that badass leaders need to learn. To be able to do that is to control your reaction in the moment. If you can't control anything else, you can always control the way you react.
Actually, that makes me think about during the Olympics in France last summer. I was amazed by obviously all the athletes, and I was wondering how, at this level and at usually very young age, they can handle stress. And I realized that, I was reading a lot and I talked to a lot of people, but in fact, the coaches teach them to handle, not to get rid of the stress because they know they're going to have the stress anyway, but it's like, how are you going to react to stress and try to control this, like, or prepare it like ahead of time. How I know I'm going to have this feeling, or maybe I'm going to be sweating, or maybe I'm going to be shaking, or whatever, and then how am I reacting to this, or preparing ahead of time instead of controlling the stress during the stress. It's like ahead of time. I know it's coming. I know it's coming. Like using specific coaching skills that will enable you to actually go over this.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I love that. And one of the things I know I've heard Simon Sinek talk about this as well, about the athletes and when they would be interviewed by the news, they would ask them, well, were you nervous before you did whatever and they would say, almost all of them would say, no, I was excited.
Mm,
And philosophic, like in our brain, physiologically, nervous and anxious or excitement power up the same way. And it's this brain shift. And so if instead of saying, I'm nervous for this podcast interview, instead say I'm excited, just by
mhm.
saying that, it's like it has this calming effect that is so powerful. And I think it's much to what you were just commenting on, is
And in
really
fact,
for mindset and what you say to yourself and how you prepare for it.
but in the French system, unfortunately, in education, most of the time, it's not, instead of come to compete in a nice way, it's like come to be eliminated. And it's like it's the elimination process instead of like the competition process. And it's a very, actually, it creates a lot of fear among, students in particular or at the younger age. And then how to embrace this when you get an adult and become a leader is another story.
Yes, yes. Okay. So why don't we talk? So one of the things I'm thinking about is how do leaders, and I think we should dive into a little bit of the cultural part as well, but how do leaders identify when they're out of alignment with their group? And I think of the example you gave with the horse and the CEO, and everyone was afraid of him and he had no clue. And then the horse was like running because that's how everyone wanted to do, but they
Mhm.
weren't because they probably had to pay, they needed a paycheck and pay their bills. So how as a leader do you identify when you're not in alignment? And then how do you take steps to either yourself adjust or get everyone back in alignment?
It's a good question, and actually a lot of answers. The horse example is actually the lack of awareness, right, of the leader in that specific case. And instead of, he blamed the horse, obviously, or he blamed,
Yes.
like, it's not my responsibility. Your horse doesn't behave, or so there's a lot of blaming because of not wanting to actually accept what is. And the reality is, if you don't have the buy-in from your teams, then you know that the growth is going to be difficult, right? And reaching the common outcome is also going to be difficult. So if that's why I'm saying consciousness and awareness is key in anything you do, and also clarifying communication and stating your values and mission and vision is key. But then you have to be willing to do so. So how do you align? Well, first of all, become aware. And then when you become aware, what do you want to become aware of? And if luckily you are willing to do so, then how do you align with your team values? Do you know your own values? Do you know the company values? Do you know the other team members' values? And how do all these align? So it's a lot of reminders of what should be remembered as a leader, or what you should clarify. What's your leadership intent in all of this? And at the end of the day, what is the outcome? So if you clarify your leadership intent, if you become aware, more conscious about your own values, your team values, then obviously everything is going to go smoothly. And it's not just like a random thing to say. It works, and you can embrace what is, and then become inspirational and have people's buy-in to actually work better together.
You know what I love about the most about the horror story is it's another analogy for the value of bringing in a third party, a coach, a mentor, a leadership professional someone who has no skin in the game of what your company is, other than to help make you guys successful, right? And bring them in and let them observe and then listen to the feedback that they provide to you, because that person is going to be more willing to say some of the difficult things. They're going to be more willing to enter into a conflict type conversation. They're going to, when we initially started talking, right? They're going to be more willing to have some radical candor with you that your team members may not. And by bringing in that third party that's willing to share this, then I think you can really speed up the process of awareness and alignment.
Absolutely. And also the way they did it with the horse was the horse is telling me so and so and so. So it's not like I'm telling you or the team is telling us. So that's why this CEO actually responded like your horse doesn't behave. Like
Well, we see this in teams, right? When someone's like, "Oh, that person, they're useless," right? And then that person goes and they work under another leader, and suddenly they're a superstar and they're crushing it. And it's like, oftentimes when I hear someone say constantly, "This is wrong with this," and it's always everything external, then I start to think, okay, I see where the real problem lies, because a strong, solid leader is able to then own and, as you've mentioned, take responsibility for where they are in the process and how they can grow first.
and also I think it's more like a question of judgment versus feelings. So the horse doesn't judge. If he has feelings, like if he doesn't, if he feels scared, then he leaves. And it's not like he's not judging, saying this gentleman is not a good leader. What does he know about this? And so he's like, it's more using your intuition and using all your senses to actually capitalize on what is and your good judgment, I would say. But intuition is key in this.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So speaking about intuition, intuition, I think, can be difficult when you go into a new culture that you're not aware of and you're trying to be a leader.
Mhm.
So, like, and I know, like, you specialize in this. You've worked with all these different cultures and you have learned slowly over time. Okay, in this culture, this word means this, but in this culture, that same word means something those types of things. Okay. So, how do you advise a leader who's working in multiple cultures to be able to be successful while still being authentic to who they are as a leader?
Talking about words, like if I choose my cat's name, which means in Japanese love, and it's a swear word in Russian. And so talking about getting lost
Example.
into translation. So it's not about intuition, it's about knowing what you're talking about. So I had no clue, but anyway, like I kept the Japanese word. Um, but if you are a leader, let's say from a country and you're going to another one, not every leadership or culture can get exported elsewhere in a significant manner. So you have to be aware, and I think we read the same book, The Culture Map from Erin Mayer at
Yeah.
INSEAD, which actually
Yep.
is how to manage multicultural teams virtually. And she inspired me and her work and her courses at INSEAD very much so and still. And it's hard to understand different cultures. Like if you're, from a hierarchy perspective or from like if you extrovert, introvert, or how you should communicate things or how you should give feedback and how decision-making process is actually being dealt with. So if you don't know all of this, you're not just going to take your own leadership skills any place in the world and act in Japan like you would act in France. It's not going to work, like really not. So even when I was working at Hennessy a few years ago, we all had a protocol class to teach us how to actually manage multicultural teams and handle Japanese culture when you're French or when you're American or when you come from different countries. So it's um it's not intuitive, like for sure. Like this in this case, you have to know. Like you have to
Didn't you tell me an example of I feel like and it was Culture Map that we were talking about that day. So we will include the links for both Culture Map and Radical Candor in the show notes. But didn't you tell me a story about like the way that in France they present a problem or they do or they make a decision and how it's the polar opposite in another area? Don't you have a few examples like that?
I think we talked about language. Let's say you speak English and you think you're going to the UK and everything's going to be easy because you're an American and it's easy, we speak English, or you go to Australia and then you address different topics and you don't understand why, when somebody says it's interesting in the US, it's absolutely not interpreted the same way it's interesting in the UK. But you better know these things. And it's like the Swiss or Canadian or Belgium or French speaking French or some countries in Africa. But yes, we do speak somehow the same language and the same roots of the language, but then the meaning of words are totally different sometimes. So again, you can get lost in translation. If you have a good sense of humor, that's good, but in business, it could be very tricky.
Exactly. Okay, so what do you feel interesting means in the US versus in the UK? So how would you define the two different for that example?
I would say if I'm telling you, or if you're telling me it's interesting, I think you really mean it's interesting, and you want to know more, and you think it's fun. And but if in the UK, if somebody tells you it's interesting, it means it's crap. Like I'm not interesting at all. And I got a journalist told me this once, and when I was working at Inside, and she said, "Oh, it's interesting," but in fact. I guess she meant, I'm not interesting at all, and it's absolutely useless. So if you don't know this, don't get offended. It's just a way of clarifying again. And I love semantics and I love words because English is not my mother tongue, as you can hear. So every time I have doubts, I clarify. And actually, it helps me. I love dictionaries. And I always looked for the meaning and clarify. What do you mean by this? What was the intent? Did you actually mean this and this and that? And this is what I understood when you said this and this and that. But even though you speak the same language, if you're with Americans in America in an American team, I think definitely you should clarify, what you mean by different purposes or by different intent, because it's most of the time an issue. Communicating, clarifying, explaining.
I actually think that this is a great analogy in that this is something that we forget. We have cultures like microcultures within our cultures as well. So
Mhm.
even if you're in the US and even if you're in the same region of the US, so let's just say you're in Atlanta and you think the way you say something means something in particular, or you think what someone else said, what they mean, let's take this lesson, like pause and say, okay, when you said this, what I heard was this. Is that what success looks like for you, or did you have something else in mind? And I love that. That is something you can use anywhere in the world. And it's maybe a little easier if you're in another country and they get that maybe you don't get their culture. And also, the thing I love about it as well is that it teaches you or you learn how to see humans as humans and say to the other person, I really, really want to know what success looks like for you. So I'm going to ask to confirm and then share back. And if they then say, no, Angela, you just cussed at me, I'd be like, how did I like I'm a Southern girl now. How did I cut that? I didn't mean to, right? But then it's a moment to first off, maybe if you have a good sense of humor, laugh about it. And I think it's also relationship building, right? That when you can do that.
Yes, and but also like let's say in the French culture, a lot of people cut you off. Like you start a sentence and I'm gonna jump on it and in some cultures it's so unpolite to do this. In the German language, you cannot do this because you only understand the meaning of the sentence until the you wait until the end. So you cannot really cut any person off. And if you do this in Asian cultures, it's very unpolite. So if you don't know the rules, people think, oh, these French people, they're so like obnoxious and they always cut everybody and like interrupt and it's not polite. But in fact, it's just a way of interacting and getting excited about the conversation. So it's, you have to understand the codes and the rules.
I love this. Okay, so I had a call this past week with a team from Germany, so a bunch of Germans and some US people, and I observed that the Germans were way better at raising their hands on the Zoom than just jumping in. And now that makes, and they probably thought that myself and some other Americans were rude because we were just jumping in and carrying on a conversation, right? And now that makes so much more sense. They were waiting to hear the full thought and then, be able to share what their message was next.
Actually, in Europe in particular, not only in Germany, but like if you at school, you have to raise your hand before talking. Like you cannot just like jump into the conversation. And I realize in the US, you are encouraged to actually jump in and share ideas and so on. So, and when we become coaches, we always say, you have to listen, 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 and let other people know. And like, don't give your opinion really, because this is not coaching, right? So you have to listen and ask the right questions, but not give your opinion. And it's a very interesting mindset when you all your life you've been taught to actually share your opinion or raise your hands to say something, and all of a sudden you have to like let back and let others talk or ask the right questions.
Well, I like the mindset, and I say I like the mindset. I am working on emulating it. I am not very good at it, but the leader being the last person to speak at the table. And I really like that because oftentimes I know I get into mode sometimes when I'm super busy, super stressed, and I'm just in decision-making mode and go in and just am like, this is the way it should be. And haven't heard anything from everyone else in the room. And instead, if I just sit there and listen to everyone else, well, the decision that we're going to make is going to be so much better than the first option.
I'm going to share an experience, if we can, about listening, which taught me everything about listening. I experimented while at INSEAD, the business school in France and Singapore. I experimented a leadership in the dark. And so the experience was led by blind people, blind leaders. And we entered a room totally covered in black, like you couldn't have a watch, a phone, nothing. You couldn't see your feet and you had to follow the voice. So they said, follow the voice, follow the voice, follow the voice. You had no clue if you had stairs, anything. You had to follow the voice and do whatever you needed to do. And they said, follow the voice. All of a sudden, you had to sit around a table. We had to sit around a table. Everybody had to state their names. And so they stated their names. And now they said, okay, now that you stated your name, you have to sit in alphabetical order.
Oh my gosh.
All of a sudden we're like, what's your name again? Can you? And it was like maybe 8 people at the table, if you can imagine. So I'm very bad at names. I'm good at faces. I remember faces, but names for me is tough. And so especially if they come from different cultures, it's not easy. So we had to place each other in alphabetical order. What do you have to do in the dark? Listen, 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 and remember and concentrate and focus on what's key. So once we were like sitting at the table, this blind leader said, you are going to be the leader of the table, somebody random at the table. And this person totally lost it because had no clue what she had to do. Nobody was like, we were all obviously in totally unexpected, areas and not in our comfort zone. And then they set the rules. They said you have to build a bridge, and then the leader of the table has one chance to go outside with other leaders of the table. And we had no clue how much time we had because we didn't have a watch. So what happens is you totally lose track of time. That's conclusion number one. You have to focus 100%. You get very tired because you have so many information in, every minute there's something coming up and coming up and coming up. And at the end of the day, it probably lasted like an hour. It sounded like 2 or 3 hours. We were all like extremely tired. But then this experience was so powerful. The leadership changed at the table because this person that the blind leader said, hello, did you lose it? Like, where are you? Are you dead or something? And then so somebody else jumped in to actually become the leader and say, I got it. I'm going to save this table. It's going to happen. And so it was a very interesting shift in just 1 hour of people not knowing each other, not knowing the rules, not knowing what we're doing, and obviously acting as if you were blind. And so we stepped out of that room, and it struck me still now, when you go to meetings, do people focus? Do people listen? Are people on their phones? And like on Zoom, it's a bit different now. But like if you're sharing the same room like we used to, how many people around the table were actually focusing and understanding who was doing what and why they were here? So it taught me a very interesting lesson about how to listen properly, how to listen intensively and meaningfully, obviously, and take act and understand what the next steps are instead of wasting everybody's time.
I love what you said at the last minute, wasting everyone's time. So I was COO of a company once, and at one point I said to the rest of the executive team, okay, I'm gonna buy one of those things to put on the door that they have in schools now, and everyone's gonna put their phone in it before they come into the room. Because I would get so sick. I'm like, you guys are constantly on your phone, right? And they're like, oh, I have to respond to this, but go ahead, I'm listening. Okay. And then 2 weeks later, something would happen and they would say, I didn't know about that. And like, oh, you know that meeting that you were emailing instead of listening? That's the meeting that we talked about this.
Exactly.
And the reality is that science has already shown we cannot multitask like we think we can. We absolutely cannot. And I can tell you, I know for myself, one thing I've had to do is I completely put my phone away. And I have actually stopped wearing my Apple Watch, so it's not pinging me during things. And I will tell you that there are times when I first started doing it, I want to just like grab it and flip, like no emergency. But then afterwards, I realized that I was actually saving time for myself because I didn't have to go back and revisit a whole bunch of things or ask as many follow-up questions or be really confused or make mistakes. And I actually wasn't wasting everyone else's time. And that's really what happens.
And also, like Edgar Tolle says, like the present moment, how present are you to yourself? How present are you in that moment? And if you're not there now, in 1 minute, it's going to be the past already. And so a lot of people are not conscious about this, like the importance of being there right now in the present moment.
I love this. I love this. Okay. So in 25 years, you've worked in 70, at least 70 countries,
I
right?
traveled to 70 countries and worked
Okay.
in 20. Yes.
And worked in 20. Okay. Okay. So when you think about, can you just maybe share and what some leaders might misunderstand about multicultural leadership? And
Mhm.
then if they misunderstand it, what's the best way to course correct?
Mhm. And so, first, one thing, if you realize how many countries there are in the world, according to certain numbers, 198 countries, and you think I travel to a lot of countries, 70 countries is not even half of the world. And so there's still a lot to discover.
More frequent flyers for you.
Yes, exactly, and more books to write for every mayor as well about all these cultures. But
Yes, yes.
if like the question was, what do you want to know that you don't know? Like or what are you supposed to know to actually lead in multicultural countries? And I think we mentioned that already, but the working it's like working on a daily basis with different cultures is one thing. Traveling to one country is another thing. You can actually be a tourist and love this or go there, and it's actually what is it you're looking for when you're going to these countries as a tourist. But also if you work with different countries, because I love people and their stories and their culture, you realize in Asia in particular, it's a lot about human beings. It's they work hard, but they also, first of all, they said if you manage multicultural teams virtually in particular, you have to, and in Asia, you have to work to spend 2.5 more time talking about family and so on before actually talking about the actual work. So if I had colleagues in Singapore, we talked about, like our parents, our children, and the studies and how everybody was. And then we got into the deep down into the topic of what we needed to talk about. But then if we were in France or in the US, then obviously you go straight to the point and you're not going to waste it, particularly in the US, time is time and we're going to start and talk about this and time is money and it's always like competition and we have to reach a goal and But actually, yeah, we're going to talk about our children maybe, like at some point if we have time, right? And so it's a very different approach of managing teams, obviously, but what do you need to know again? Like when if you're a CEO comes to somebody and say, "How's your daughter doing?" And then it's not weird, it's just nice actually. And be kind always, I always say, like this, and people will say, "Oh my God, like the CEO came and he asked me how I was doing," and he actually listened to the answer.
Oh, there you go. That's the important part. Because how many people I know in the US, it's a really big thing where people will say, "Hey, how are you doing today?" And then they don't even listen. Like you can practice, you can say shitty and you can say like shitty with a smile and they'll be like, "Oh, that's great," and keep going. And you're like, "Okay, you clearly did not really care how I was
Mhm.
doing today." So I love the mindset of trying to not asking questions that they have to give a solid answer to, not a yes or no or something like that, and bringing something, for example, on a Monday, instead of saying, "How was your weekend?" or people would just be like, "Oh, great," or boring or something like that. Instead, say, "What was the most exciting thing about your weekend?"
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, it ties to, I'm a firm believer that badass leaders really want to get to know humans as humans. And getting to know humans as humans is part about getting to know the whole being, not just the being that you see as being a part of your return on investment for your company. Because really, the whole being is a return on the investment. But most leaders do not realize that. And they're just going for the action item that seems to make most sense that deals with that individual.
And I actually went to different meetings and I would not state the company, but I said instead of having your tag with your title, how about having a tag with what you like the most or what your values are or something? Then get, and people was like, they looked at me as if it was very weird, but I said, like I don't care about your title really. Like if you're a leader, it doesn't mean, like we know what your intent is or what you passions are or what we could actually relate to according to your interest or passion. And so I think it could be something interesting like putting a name to an art piece. It's the same, like what does it mean actually. And I would get curious about you, Angela, if you had like a, I don't know, like I love whatever, cello or something.
Beekeeping. Beekeeping. That's my latest hobby is beekeeping. Yeah. Oh, I love this idea. I'm already thinking about ways that this can be implemented in future things that I do.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm totally gonna steal this. I'm gonna steal all these ideas. I'm not sure I can steal the horse idea, although you can tell the number of times I bring it up that I really want to do this horse
Don't have to steal it.
experience.
It's actually sharing. I think that's what I love, sharing expertise and experiences, and that's what makes people grow and develop a multicultural mindset.
I'm going to call out Drew Harden, who is the CEO of Blue Compass, and he has the most fun team building things I've ever seen. They're on YouTube, and we'll include links to the episode we interviewed him with in the show notes. But Drew, I really think you need to do this horse thing. So just saying this. So, okay. Well, one of the things that I'm really passionate about trying to educate the world in, and I'm collecting these responses from quite a few people because I'd love to hear different perspectives on this. The first one is, what do you feel the difference between a leader and a manager is?
Mhm. So for me, the manager knows what he has to do, right? It's like in the orchestra. We said the musicians know their music, they know what to do, and the leader is gonna give the tone, set the tone, or obviously use his intuition to make decisions that others would probably not make. And you could be a good manager, not necessarily a good leader. And not all leaders have intuition, but I think if you use all your senses and intuition, and if you're aware of what you should be aware of, then you become, a great leader.
I love that. I think it's a leader somehow pauses to feel intently with all of the senses. And I say feel, and I'm not just meaning feeling like with the fingers, right? But
Mhm.
absorbing everything and being able to make a cohesive decision or push or collaboration or move towards cohesion in a way that involves all of those senses. That's brilliant. I love that.
And
I
they
love
can
that.
also be vulnerable. You could be a very intuitive leader, badass leader, but also very vulnerable and show you emotions. And you don't know everything. You don't have to know everything. And this is how it comes, to a great point of sharing and embracing the rest of the team and everybody's skills and empowering others.
Yep. I love this. Okay. So the other topic I'm really passionate about is conflict resolution. And I think, especially for you, we've talked a little bit on this episode already about ways to handle conflict resolution. But can you give us, like, what is your personal philosophy on conflict, first off? And if you were advising a team, what advice would you give them to reach cohesion through that resolution process?
First of all, is clarifying, communicating, and asking questions again. Like, what is it we need to understand? Or what did you understand through saying this? Or what's the key issue there? And if you had to solve the issue yourself, what would you do? What would you suggest? So it's more like listening and using your intuition, obviously, when it's good to listen and when it's good to intervene, but listening skills and empowering others to actually share, let them a space, a safe space to share what's going on, whether culturally or financially or like technically, you don't know. It's listening and then pause and let them talk. And sometimes one issue one day is totally like disappearing the next day. So the conflict resolution, sometimes a big deal one day becomes something totally, like nonsense the next day.
Yeah. And I think sometimes too, it's remembering that sometimes the conflict we think we see isn't really what the conflict is. And by following your pattern of listening, then I find as a leader, sometimes I can hear the other person say something that doesn't have to do with what we think the conflict is. And I can pause and say, oh, wait, you said this. Tell me more about this. And
Hmm.
sometimes that digging into and saying, tell me more about this area when something like that, and you can only identify that if you're truly listening. And when you
Hmm.
see those things that seem a little out of place, sometimes those are hints towards what the real underlying issue is that's causing that conflict.
And also putting things into perspective, instead of just stating something or assuming, never assume, right?
Yes. So is this the same quote in the UK or as it is or over not in the like in Europe as it is in the US?
Interesting.
The assumption makes an ass out of you and me both or something like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Does that resonate with you? Or you're
It
like, I
does.
don't know what she's talking. Okay. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about what is one core belief, one core leadership belief that you believe a lot of leaders have, and maybe every emerging leader might have that you would ask them to question.
Question their biases.
Tell me more.
It could be, like you think or assumptions, like you think but are you sure you know what you're stating? And question the unquestionable. And also always put things into perspective, like don't think you have the right answer and leave space for, as you said earlier, like leave space for other options.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so what would you say then at this state through this conversation, your definition of a badass leader is?
Somebody who take risks because it's risky not to take risks, and somebody who is not afraid of her or his opinion, and who can lead intuitively but also peacefully with kindness and direction.
I love that. I love that. I love that. Okay. So if there's one piece of information you want the guests to, or the listeners to take away from your story today, what would you want them to remember the most?
There's other ways than just one way to lead. It's always great to consider others' opinions and put things into perspectives and be kind always.
Be kind always. I love that. Okay. What is your favorite motivational quote?
Be yourself everybody else is taken. This is Oscar Wilde.
Yes, 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 yes. And I think every one of us were born, we're one unique person. I remember when I was a young kid and I used to fly a lot for a young child because my parents were divorced and one lived in Ohio and one lived in Georgia. And I remember being up in the plane when you could look down and you could see all the little cars and all the people. And I would constantly think, I wonder what that person's up to today. And I wonder I wonder where they're going. Like, I wonder, they're in their car, I wonder, is it a family? All these different things about being curious about other people, but also identifying that you're the only person sitting in that seat 11B on that particular Delta flight. It's only you. You only have one life to live. So really make it count.
Exactly. And also respect others and cultivate your creativity and your dreams, obviously. And it's great that you said, you can make up stories about anything and anyone. I love people's stories. So if you want to tell me your story and if I can help in any ways, I'll be very happy to hear any crazy, interesting, different multicultural mindset.
Love this, love this. Okay, so how can the listeners find you and learn more about you and connect with you?
So you can go to my website, which is www.leadership slash peaceful slash leadership.com. I guess you'll share it. And
Yep.
I'm currently in France, but I'm actually somebody told me the world is my playground, so I could go any place in the world to meet you, and you can come as well. And it's easy to do what we're doing today. I'm glad I was part of this, and I fascinated by all the experiences that we shared. And I think anybody could experiment peaceful leadership, and please give me feedback. I'd love to hear about the ways or other ways we can lead and maybe implement that website and that way of thinking.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you for bringing the badass into this podcast today. I am very grateful.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining me for today's episode of the Badass Leaders Podcast. To hear more interviews with industry experts and learn how to grow your career and leadership potential, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to ensure you do not miss future episodes. This podcast is a production of the AGN Group. To learn more about the AGN Group, visit our website at theagnGroup.com. There, you can discover more about our services, which include hosting workshops, management consulting, brand strategy, keynote speaking, and more. Follow us on all social media channels shown on the screen and displayed in the show notes. And until next week, be brave and be badass.